How's that? Any good?
Yeah.
It's on. Is it loud enough? Yeah. Okay. Are you sniggering? Right, good evening. Nice to see some new faces. Thanks for coming. If you do have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please. Thank you. Right, a massive welcome to new tour speaker Todd Acamesis with What is the Nature and Purpose of Physical Reality? Todd shares some of his many experiences as an astral traveller into other dimensions. And having had two myself, this is a subject I find absolutely fascinating. We'll also focus on maybe a different slant on the UFO phenomenon, which may court some controversy. Please welcome Todd Acamesis.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, I'm a little bit nervous, so bear with me. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to start off with giving you a little bit of sort of backstory on me so you understand where I'm coming from, because I'm not a standard researcher in the sense of reading books, interviewing people. I do a lot of direct experiences. So from age 6, I've been lucid dreaming and having out-of-body experiences as sort of spontaneously. As an adult, I'm trained in remote viewing. I've also been meditating for a good 30 years of my life. So there's lots of areas that I have direct experience with, and that's where I come from with my experiences. So very rarely I share things as in a belief or something that I feel I know beyond what I've learned myself through my direct experiences. So everything I'll share tonight will pretty much be based on my own experiences. All right? So as I said, age 6 years old, I started having lucid dreams just spontaneously. And it was one of those things where I didn't really think much to talk to other people about it because I just assumed everybody was doing it. You know, I would hear other people at that age talking about their dreams, and I just kind of, like I said, assumed that they were having that lucid experience where you don't just maybe know you're dreaming, you're not just aware you're dreaming, but it's as real as physical waking reality because you're fully conscious and aware within it with your waking consciousness. And that makes a huge difference. Anybody here have any lucid dreams? Quite a few of you. So you'll probably be aware that when it gets to a certain level of lucidity, it's as physically real as your waking reality, and that's what can be very confusing about it. And if that's something you've never encountered, you might find that a little bit difficult to digest because it is as physically real as this. And it'll even trick you into believing you're actually awake in your everyday life. And then you wind up under the covers back in bed again. You've probably already got dressed, had breakfast, and then you wake up for a second time. These are called false awakenings. And you can have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 false awakenings in a row sometimes, which can make you sort of get very fearful, wondering if you ever are going to wake back into the world that is your grounded reality. So I'll talk a lot about false awakenings because to me that's some of the evidence from my perspective that we're living in a mental construct, and physical reality to me is a rule set within one of these programmed realities. And so anyhow, that'll be my perspective on that. I'll also talk about the UFO phenomena from my perspective, which I've gained through my out-of-body experiences, having direct contact with different non-humans. But I want to start off with those early day experiences because I think that'll give you insight into who I am as a person. So, like I said, age 6, I started having lucid dreams, and within 3 months of that, I started having another type of experience, which I couldn't quite label, but I knew it was very different. And thankfully, I had my mother, who was very open to the experiences that I was having. She journaled those early years for me. So this is, so about 3 months in, I started having an experience which I didn't know how to label. I was 6 years old. I didn't have, sort of labels such as the out-of-body experience. But I knew what was happening was radically different from the dream state. And the differences were, even from a child's perspective, quite extreme. So with a lucid dream, I typically woke to the experience while in the middle of a dream. Whereas in this other experience that I didn't have a label for, I would usually either be woken from sleep with some very powerful energy phenomena, which again, I didn't know, I wouldn't call it energy at that age. So I'm articulating this now from an adult perspective. So I'd have very powerful energy sensations that would either wake me to full waking consciousness from sleep, or as I'm lying there in bed, going to sleep, or waking up between sleep cycles, I would have these powerful energy sensations, and then suddenly I would be standing in the middle of my bedroom, and I could actually see my physical body lying in bed. That never happened in the dream state. So when I was having lucid dreams, very rarely I would be in my own room. If I was during a dream, the dream state was usually very flexible. I could change things at will. In this other state, once again as an adult, labeling it the out-of-body state, it wasn't so flexible. You could still do things such as walking through walls in the out-of-body state, because you're not walking through a physical wall anymore. You're walking through the substrate, the energy layer of that wall, if you like. Whereas within dreams, if I walked through a wall that I thought was my house, and then I would suddenly be transported anywhere, because dreams change like that very easily. Whereas with an out-of-body experience, if I was to walk through a wall, typically I'd still be in the same location. So if I was in a bedroom and walked through an external wall, I'd then be in the garden. So I knew there was differences between these two states. And as a young child, I sort of just, recorded, like I said, with my mother, the experiences I was having. And this took place all the way up to age 12 before it started closing down. And I don't exactly know the reasons why it started shutting down, but it did. I kind of think it might have something to do with my development. I was the kind of classic black sheep. I've got 3 brothers who are not into this stuff at all. They didn't seem to have very unusual experiences, in those formative years. And so I kind of started getting to a point where my development, I think, was started to go in a particular direction, which, really isolated me. When I did share experiences with my friends or just my peers at school, nobody seemed to be having anything like this. I started developing very quickly different sort of nicknames like E.T., you name it. And I think when I hit age 12, perhaps there was a part of either my consciousness or part of this higher consciousness that decided we need to close the door on this, because his development is going to sort of definitely isolate him more and more. So it stopped around that age. But not before hundreds of experiences were recorded in these journals that my mother kept. And the out-of-body experiences in particular, when looking back on those journals now as an adult, are very interesting, very insightful. I was meeting a lot of the same characters again and again, or agents, whatever you want to call them. Some were human, some were non-human in orientation. And as a child, being sort of also having the dream stuff, it didn't really feel unusual. It just felt different. And it wasn't like it was something that I couldn't really get my head around, in the sense of believing that there's more to reality than just, what we're taught in school. There's plenty of sci-fi stuff going on at that time period. I was 7 years old when the original Star Wars film came out. Plenty of weird characters hanging out in the Star Wars canteen. So, it wasn't something that I was closed to. I was very open to this possibility. When I was 12 years old, like I said, all this started shutting down. And then for 2 years, although I'd maybe have the odd sort of psychic experience, telepathic experience, interesting dream experience, I didn't have any more of those out-of-body experiences, which is still at that age, I didn't know what they were. I just knew they were different. Then age 14, I joined the Boy Scouts, and we always used to meet in this church about a mile from my house. Me and the other boys would get there early, at least half an hour early sometimes, so we could play hide and seek before the scoutmasters came. So, it was just our bit of time for bonding beyond, being scouts. And on this one night, I remember we were playing hide and seek, and I was hiding behind a tree, and the front of the church and the steps, which were concrete, were the home base, or homie as I think you call it here. So I was hiding behind this tree, and I noticed the seeker had run off in one direction, the opposite direction, so I thought, that's my time. So I just sort of bolted for the front of the church in home base. And I was running really quite fast, and I was really excited, and I leapt to sort of meet the step in just the right manner you would want to, and I completely messed that up and tripped over the step, and I was going so fast, I didn't have time to, my arms didn't have time to react, my hands didn't have time to react, so I sort of landed face and head right on the concrete really hard, and bounced a few times as well. So I'm lying there in absolute shock, and my vision suddenly came to like a tunnel vision or pinhole vision, but then started noticing other things going on. So although I could only see like a small fraction of my physical reality, I started to actually see other stuff overlaying that my normal reality perspective. I started seeing other people who I knew weren't there physically. There were other sort of objects, strange sort of stuff. It was as if I was seeing multiple layers of reality simultaneously, and without the normal filter that we're used to. So lying there, eventually I stood up, and like I said, there were other people. Some people didn't seem to realize that I could see them. I think it was just one of those moments where I had actually interrupted the brain's normal sort of ability to lock onto one transmission. And I think that's what the brain is really good at. It's almost like the BIOS in a computer. It's regulating information, flowing between the operating system, which to me is our mind, which is a non-physical thing. So for any of you science bods that might be here in the audience, that's not my perspective. My perspective, I don't believe that that consciousness is an phenomenon of the brain, that it's a byproduct of the brain. I think it's quite clearly to me the other way around. And I think the out-of-body state of consciousness, near-death experiences, this kind of stuff can show us, if we're really dedicated to doing the research, that we are more than our physical bodies. So I got up off the pavement, and as best I could with the little bit of vision, physical vision that I had, I walked into where the meeting would take place, and I sat down. I didn't tell anybody that I'd hit my head. I probably should have done. And I went the whole sort of scout meeting having these multiple layers of vision. So I think it was probably clairvoyance. My mother came to pick me up later on after the meeting ended, and I didn't tell her either. I remember getting into bed, and my head was pounding. It was feeling quite awful, in fact. And I remember going to sleep eventually, and waking up later that night to a buzz of activity around my body. But the strange thing was, I wasn't in my body. I was sort of standing off, a couple meters away from my body, looking at all the action. And there seemed to be beings sort of very busy around me. And there was one that was standing next to me, and I sort of just looked over and suddenly had this being's voice in my head, which said, "You took quite a bit of a fall, little man." And I was like, okay. and he was just kind of describing to me that they were working on my energy body. I'm now sort of quite comfortably in my astral body. If you can imagine like an onion, and these just different layers, to our sort of bigger self, if you like. And so I was witnessing them, in a sense, working on my energy body, and maybe even on my physical body. But when they were doing this, he was, to the best I guess he could with a 14-year-old, describing, that I was in quite a bit of danger.